for June 11th for the Growth Committee. I'll ask that when you speak, you put your mic on so that we have people online that can hear us. So I'll call the meeting to order. Can I get approval of the minutes for May 13th? Barry and Maya on the question, all those in favor? Thank you very much. Can I get approval of the agenda? Barry and Mariah on the question. Thank you very much. Disclosure of conflict of interest. Anybody? Not seeing any. No consent agenda. And we'll have the 6.1 presentation. Over to you, Amy.
There we go. Thank you, Deputy. Our first item is the review of the governance reform recommendations. So just as by way of sort of refresher and background quickly, in August 2024, the City commissioned SHS Consulting and Refact Consulting to complete a housing gap analysis and investigation of possible governance reform models to support the objectives of the city's affordable housing action plan and to enhance housing outcomes. The gap analysis was presented to Growth Committee in November 2024. SHS has now completed the final report, which included an analysis of 4 possible models and recommendation of a preferred model. I'd also highlight that there's a supplementary staff report in your package with a recommendation to move forward with creation of an implementation plan for the recommended model and then return back to Growth Committee. So I'll now happy to introduce Mr. Ed Starr, SHS Consulting Partner, and Mr. Ken Folds, Principal of Refact Consulting. They're here to present and share the findings from the report and the evaluation of models that will help in a greater way to address the identified gaps in the housing system. And with that, I will hand it over to, I think Ken is speaking first? Or
well,
Ed
actually,
speaking first.
Actually, I'm speaking first, and thanks very much. And we're delighted to be here today. I'm just going to make a very quick introduction. My name is Ed Starr, and I'm a senior partner at SHS. We've been working with the city on a variety of housing-related subjects over the last 3-4 years, and played an instrumental role in preparing the action plan that went before council a couple of years ago, and then have been working very closely with staff and local stakeholders on this governance review. Ken Folds has been instrumental in all of the work we've been doing. He and I collaborate quite often on this type of work, and he's highly familiar with the subject at hand. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken to take you briefly through our findings, our methodology, the tools, and what we're recommending, and then open it up for questions.
Great, thanks very much, Ed. As Ed mentioned, our goal today is just to give you a very brief highlight of the report that's part of your package, just touching on some key pieces, and then make sure we leave some time for Q&A at the end. So, as noted in the introduction, this study was born out of the Housing Action Plan completed in 2022, and questions arose at that time about the continuing role of housing as an issue in municipalities across the province, like St. John, and the continuing shifting landscape in terms of responsibilities and government responses to that. The project was undertaken, as noted, in 2 key pieces: an existing conditions assessment on the first part, and the second part to really dig into the reform analysis, where we looked at specific models. One of the key things that we wanted to underscore was that there is an existing housing hierarchy that exists policy-wise at all levels of government. And there's been, a very traditional role in terms of federal, provincial, regional, and municipal responsibilities. What we've seen over the last few years is a bit more intermingling of those roles and some shifting as the federal government has become a little bit more engaged with municipalities directly, and there have been shifting landscapes provincially depending on the various governments in power at the time and the policies that they promote. So all that to say, there is an existing framework, but that framework is shifting. That expresses itself locally in terms of the housing ecosystem in a number of different ways. And one of the key things we've identified as part of the action plan back in 2022 was the variety of players and who have different roles within the local system. Housing is a complex system. It's reliant on the actions of many players and funding from different sources. So the coordination within that system is a very common issue, and one that certainly highlighted itself in our work. As a result of the needs study that was done in support of the action plan in 2022, there were really 4 key gap areas that were identified with regards to supportive and special needs housing, vulnerable households housing, affordable rental, and affordable ownership. And one of the interesting things in terms of what's been happening locally since 2022 is there's been a number of local partners out there in the ecosystem that are established, and they've continued to take up different programs, initiatives, and resources in terms of responding to these gap areas. And as you can see in the chart here, when we did these estimates late last year, there's a significant number of affordable units in process and planned by these individuals. And you can see there's a cross-section here of both private sector, not-for-profit, and supportive housing providers. So there's quite a bit of work going on across the continuum in response to these gap areas. The one area we would say that maybe hasn't received the same attention is the affordable ownership piece. But I think it's really encouraging to see the activity that's happening locally over the last few years. With that in mind, the city's role within the ecosystem has continued to evolve as well. And while it has always had a traditional policy and regulation role with regards to property standards enforcement and land use regulation, the offerings made by provincial and federal governments in the last couple of years have created a number of opportunities to expand on delivery of local programs, whether that's through the Rapid Housing Initiative or the Housing Accelerator Fund. And as most would be familiar with, a number of really key initiatives that actually provide the resources to move forward on some critical housing solutions in response to those issues. As part of our work, we undertook in the first phase some very intensive discussions with a cross-section of stakeholders in the community. This was both nonprofit supportive, government, private sector, to really get a sense of what people in the ecosystem were seeing in terms of the challenges and opportunities more broadly. But we also specifically asked them their opinions as it relates to the municipal role in housing and what that should be. So they were generally encouraged by the recent activity, the heightened level of engagement, the additional coordination, but they felt that there was certainly room for improvement in terms of coordinating that ecosystem and helping to focus on the key issues. What they were also very clear about was that they felt that adding an additional housing delivery entity from the city would create more issues in the local system, and they were quite concerned about adding bureaucracy to the system that was already there. So they were very supportive of the facilitative side, not as supportive of direct engagement. With that in mind, we scanned and identified 4 potential models for the local housing landscape that would be appropriate within the model. We did have a discussion with our steering committee at the city about these particular models. As you can see, we've sort of provided a range of engagement here from a direct municipal entity that would be directly involved in delivery of housing in terms of development and operation, a local commission model that was requested that we review, which was really focused more around the delivery of housing services, but could be used as a delivery agent as well. A housing secretariat function, which was more of a center of expertise function within the city structure that would be focused solely on housing and be able to operate across service areas to facilitate outcomes. And then probably the more collaborative and community-based model, an advisory committee, much like the one that was envisioned within the Housing Action Plan in 2022, that would focus on coordinating all those stakeholders around a table in a more collaborative way. As part of our work, we also looked at specific real-world examples that would illustrate each of those various models to help understand how they might work locally. And for each of the models, we had a case study. Those are highlighted in the appendix to the report, and they were very helpful at fleshing out some of the key issues. The other example, or the other issue that we had to do, was in order to make a consistent comparison across those models that we developed, we would have to translate them into how they might look on the ground in St. John. So we took each of the models, talked about the functional roles given the size and scale of development. We did some high-level costing around emplacement, staffing, operating, and capital costs, and then projected some model impacts. And again, this was really to help measure one model against each other in terms of their effectiveness. One of the other things we used as part of the analysis process was objectives and criteria that were again vetted with the steering committee as part of the process. And we sort of set out the ideals in terms of what the models would hope to achieve from both a system enhancement and an efficiency and effectiveness perspective, and then use the evaluation criteria to examine each of the models and measure them one to the other. Again, the results of that analysis are included as appendices within the report. What the analysis told us is that in terms of the municipal entity and local commission models, they tended to have much higher emplacement costs and needed additional funds to sort of sustain and grow themselves. The concern also was that by creating another entity and adding it into a busy ecosystem already, there was a potential there that they could defer or take away from the resources. If there's only so much pie in the system, having another player there might create some challenges. The other obvious consideration is that those two models would have a more clear city direction and focus, and it would be one of the challenges they would have to overcome was trying to align with the good work that's happening out in the community and the sector. They would certainly have some direct impact on the supply side of things, but that would come at the expense of potentially other stakeholders within the system. The Housing Secretariat model as a facilitation model sort of enables the opportunity, has lower emplacement costs, is cheaper to sustain, but it also has an ability to enhance what's happening in the ecosystem already and help facilitate and coordinate some of those outcomes. So it provides a bit more robust response in terms of helping the sector build capacity and move forward. The advisory committee is probably the most financially simple of the models, but it does wholly rely on sector partners to deliver on those housing outcomes. So while it has it's financially attractive, it might not have the same level of impact in terms of facilitating outcomes. As a result, our recommendation is the Housing Secretariat model, because we think it adds the most value for money in terms of what it's going to do, and has the ability to create the most impact through that facilitative role. And we think that, again, it's sort of building on some of the work that's been done already, but can do that in a more organized, coordinated, and resourced way. The secondary option, if didn't want to proceed that route, would be to go with the advisory committee model. Again, it has a more collaborative approach. It can be sustained more effectively, but it might not have the same level of impact. So again, our preferred model is the Housing Secretariat based on the analysis that we did. In terms of rationale, again, we think it really builds on the value of the current ecosystem. You've got a number of partners in the system that are doing good work already. This will help build on and add value to that. Fosters more coordination with those stakeholders by using existing infrastructure and system resources rather than creating more. It also builds more capacity in the system without taking away from the work that we're doing. Again, financially, we think it's a prudent investment based on the resources that are already available there. It's just more of a coordination function, really. And we think that it provides a very strong anchor, especially as we've seen in the current environment where the federal government is taking more of an interest in connecting with municipalities directly for delivery of programs. It gives you that active presence and an ability to work with other government resources to help with those local outcomes. And certainly it's a more stable way to help. It's a more sustainable and stable model in terms of managing when some of those federal government programs are available. There's still functions and roles that secretariat can play. With that in mind, we did flag in the report that while our analysis helps scope down the roles here, there is a need to sort of take that Housing Secretariat model role and really mold it in to the existing framework. So an implementation plan would be necessary here to sort of sort out how structurally this would work, the decision-making functions, the roles, and how to convert some of the staffing pieces to have the most beneficial effect. The other thing is how to bring in an advisory function and connect the community into this function, and how to deal with some of the transitional requirements of moving to this. And likewise, we highlighted a number of key success factors we think that are important bringing forward the model. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions from committee.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I personally think that this is an excellent report. When I read through it, I think you were very, deep in your investigation as to where we should go, and certainly the Secretariat model, I think, is a good one. Anybody have any questions, or can I get a motion to receive the? Okay, and Barry seconded. Okay, on the question.
I ask a question or say a question? I just also wanted to say that I really liked the report. I like that it recognized the work of the nonprofits that we currently have. So I like that component of it. There was a lot of things in there that I hadn't thought of when you're trying to move forward with what role you would play in all of this. And I see like the housing entity one or the municipal entity would obviously have more cost to it, and it would be, I would think, quite a load on staff as well. We would have the resources to really go forward with something that in depth, where we already have partners that are doing a lot of that work. So I was happy to read the report, and I do like the recommendation. So I just wanted to say thanks. I thought it was a good report. It took a lot of things into consideration, and it gave us a nice overview of what's happening and what should be happening. So thank you.
Your worship. Okay, and on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Unanimous. Perfect. Thank you very much. We go on to 6.2. Amy?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy and members of the Growth Committee. By way of a brief background, in 2022, the city adopted the Succeed and Stay immigration strategy, which was developed through collaboration with key partners, including Envision St. John, the St. John Local Immigration Partnership, Newcomer Connections, and many others. The strategy identifies immigration as a vital tool for long-term growth. For the next two items on your agenda, you'll hear from Envision and Growth staff about transitioning to a regional immigration strategy, which is one of the key recommendations of the city's Succeed and Stay strategy. With that as a brief background, I'm pleased to present Catherine Melvin, the Program Manager of St. John LIP, and Andrew Beckett. Andrew, are you speaking? Maybe. No? Okay, Catherine. We'll provide an update on the regional immigration strategy. Thanks.
Oh, Catherine, can you turn your mic on?
Oh, thank you. The green one. That would help. So thank you everyone for joining and allowing me to be here today to present this. So we're going to talk today about a community regional immigration strategy entitled Pathways to Belonging. It's a framework for achieving sustainable newcomer success in the St. John region. And I'm pleased to have here with me today Andrew Beckett and Mohammed Bega, who are both the co-chairs of the St. John LIP. So this strategy is going to be led through the St. John Local Immigration Partnership, which is a collaborative community initiative designed to improve newcomer settlement, inclusion, and retention in the St. John region. The strategy is based on the understanding that immigration is vital to the vibrancy and sustainability of our community, the overall economic resilience, especially in turbulent times, and the continued development of our workforce, which is particularly necessary due to our aging resident population. So as Amy mentioned, the St. John LIP has been working on the city's Succeed and Stay strategy since 2022. But we know since its launch that our community has changed. We've changed in governance model, we've lived through profound population changes and post-pandemic instability. So why now? Why are we at this point where we're looking at a regional strategy? We need to revisit the 2022 success strategy. And although it was adopted in 2022, a lot of the data that was used to develop that strategy was actually from 2019. So before we had pandemic, population, immigration changes. It was called for the strategy to be reassessed following municipal reform in 2023. And the strategy was also identified to be regionalized and take that approach when ready. There's also been significant changes in immigration policy, particularly over the last couple of years. We've seen some growing anti-immigrant challenges in the community. And we also had the LIP transition from the City of St. John to Envision St. John just a couple months ago in April. So for those reasons, it was really important to update the plan. So the new plan will build on the 2022 foundation in two very important ways. First, regionalizing the approach to include Grand Bay Westfield, Rothesay, Quispamsis, Hampton, Fundy St. Martin's, and the Fundy Rural District, as well as St. John. And secondly, to incorporate new data, which will be inclusive of information and learnings associated with the pandemic and post-pandemic in population flows, as well as everything we've learned since we launched the strategy in 2022. So these new lenses have allowed us to build a robust plan that responds to current needs. It's data-driven, region-wide roadmap built to attract, integrate, and retain newcomers, but also fosters systemic change that will help us achieve sustainable community growth. I'm just quickly going to touch on a couple of the ways in which this was developed, and then we'll talk about the pillars of the strategy. So it was guided by these four principles to ensure we had diverse voices incorporated. We collaborated and engaged community stakeholders. It was data-driven, and the decisions were informed by qualitative and quantitative data. And the plan was strengthened through validation and stakeholder feedback before finalization. There was a four-step process which we engaged with the consultants to undertake a literature review of existing plans and documents, to engage with ecosystem members in one-on-one interviews, community consultations, surveys, dialogues with newcomers, focus groups. Ecosystem partners were brought together to rethink what the strategy would look like and explore opportunities and draft preliminary recommendations. And finally, engaging stakeholders to collaboratively develop an evaluation dashboard and create responsibility matrix and coordination, which we're underway with doing. There was a steering committee that helped form the initial strategy. So these are participants from so many different backgrounds. We have post-secondary institutions, municipality, government, employers. We had newcomers themselves. And we also have all of these ecosystem partners who are supporting the strategy and will help with the implementation and coordination of the plan and the projects over the long term. So what we heard during the analyze phase, there were 7 key themes that were identified that the community plan will address. The first is the need to deepen engagement and be a truly welcoming community. The second is to identify systemic gaps in integration and support services. The third is to deal with persistent racism and discrimination. The fourth was challenges with access to housing and transit. The fifth was weak pathways to employment, how we can how we can support those. The sixth is gaps in youth and family retention. Finally, the insufficient coordination of the system and the ecosystem partners. So the final plan will present a vision for a future where the St. John region welcomes newcomers, supports their dreams, and champions inclusivity. It will also, the mission to get us there will be through collaboration and communication to drive change, foster diversity, and create welcoming, equitable communities with sustainable solutions for newcomers. So the plan itself has 3 pillars, the first being welcome and inclusive communities, the second, economic and educational opportunities for all, and the third, coordinated support and advocacy. Each of these pillars will have a detailed work plan that will include the objectives, measures, results, champions, and actions to get us there. So I'll break down those 3 pillars quickly. So the first one being coordinated support and advocacy. So this pillar is dedicated to ensuring the immigration ecosystem shares a single source of truth. So this is a similar strategy that was in the Succeed and Stay strategy, similar theme where there's a no wrong door approach for newcomers in our community. Also a strong ecosystem that fosters collaboration and communication, to have greater coordination around challenging systemic racism as well. So these 3 objectives are designed to align the resources in the community and coordinate activities to create a resilient ecosystem and supportive environment for newcomers and immigrants. The second pillar is welcoming and inclusive communities. So the 2 objectives here are that the ecosystem has consistent and high quality use of both official languages through service delivery, and that we bridge the cultural divide between long-term residents and newcomers to foster mutual understanding, respect, and community cohesion. An example of this would be last time I was here presenting our Region, Our Home inclusivity campaign. That's how we're going to work towards creating those bridges and creating an inclusive community. And the third pillar here is economic and educational opportunities for all. So this is dedicated to ensuring that small and medium enterprises understand the value of hiring newcomers and support their inclusion, and that there's strong collaboration on bridging skills gap with industry partners and targeting training and increased engagement of industry partners to match the needs, their needs, and also the skills that newcomers are bringing to the community. So all the work associated with these 3 pillars will generate the following expected results. A strong and interconnected ecosystem that fosters collaboration and communication, a shared database of information that serves as a single source of truth for the ecosystem, that small and medium-sized businesses understand the value of hiring newcomers and maintain employment pathways to support their inclusion, that industry and ecosystem partners collaborate to develop programs and services to bridge skills gaps, that the ecosystem consistently uses high-quality communications in French and English to bridge linguistic divides, that the ecosystem and larger community work together to challenge and reduce instances of systemic racism, and that the cultural divide between residents and newcomers is bridged, creating mutual understanding, respect, and community cohesion. So the implementation phase has started and will continue until 2030 under the leadership of the St. John Local Immigration Partnership. The SJLIP will be undergoing a strategic realignment to ensure it's adequately positioned to support these priorities and advance the vision. In the short term, the SJLIP will use the existing targets from the Succeed and Stay strategy as interim measures of success. And with help of the partners in the ecosystem, the SJLIP will validate and adjust targets and key performance indicators to reflect the shared priorities and objectives outlined in the new plan. The SJLIP will also work with the ecosystem to establish regular reporting cycle to track progress and maintain accountability to the larger community. So for next steps, as we are in the earliest stages of the plan implementation, the next step is for the City of St. John to endorse the Pathways to Belonging Regional Immigration Strategy as the new community plan to replace the Succeed and Stay immigration strategy. And Fabricio will talk more about that after me. The second is for the LIP to proceed with establishing an operational plan to include measurement framework and communications frameworks in order to deliver the strategy. The SJLIP will review and realign the working groups to the regional strategy as needed. And finally, to create co-create action plans for the regional immigration strategy to move forward. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
I have a quick question, Catherine. Is the language no wrong door, is that done?
No, we still
Okay.
use that. We still use that approach. Yep.
Okay, yeah, I like that. I think it's clear, like the ecosystem shares the same truth or something. If I read that, I would think that would be on a more philosophical. But no wrong door. I get that means I can, I'm going to get my questions answered or whatever. No matter how I, approach it or whatever it is, I'll be able to, I guess, get support to get to where I need to go. And the other question I had was, we talked about websites versus apps. Is there any, does a website get used in the website? Because that would have to be updated. And I don't know how the apps work as well, and we only had one presentation on an app, and not that I'm trying to, suggest that. No, it's not that. I'm just curious about apps because they seem to be more popular with a younger age group, and so I don't know, if that would be something that you might be looking at as you go forward or not, how the apps work or versus the website. And I don't know, what the work would be involved in a website versus an app, because the website would have to be updated to be always be current. So that's my only comments.
Yeah, in terms of the single source of truth versus the no wrong door, the no wrong door approach is certainly the newcomer approach. So we want to make sure no matter where newcomers are going, they're receiving services and the information. The single source of truth is almost more internal, so that all of the partners around the table are being able to share the information, the data, and to work together on that. And do you want to talk about the website?
Yeah, no, look, Your Worship, you make a good point in terms of apps, and I think it is definitely something that we want to look at. What we've talked about with the city about is consolidation of some of the resources we have right now, because the city has some web resources and some print material. We've got and envision some. We need to bring that all together, which administratively we're working through that process now to bring those all together. With them all together, I don't think there's any question that we're going to be moving towards some sort of app-based approach to make it easily accessible for the newcomer, which is more the external piece that Catherine's talking about. That the internal is that single source of truth. The external is the no wrong door, and I would see an app being probably the easiest way to get there. Not necessarily the one we looked at before, but something along those lines. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Barry?
Yeah, Catherine, when you came up about racism, now, I've never experienced a lot of racism in St. John. I've been here all my life, but I'm an old white guy, so, we've caused all the trouble in the world. So, I've never been a minority except once living in Quebec in a French community, but I don't see the overt racism in St. John. And even I've talked to people who have lived in Fredericton and Moncton and St. John and found St. John the friendliest. But when you see the federal government numbers, they say, okay, we're going to cut immigration. Well, the big cities like Ottawa, Calgary, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, they get their fair share like we do, but then our share moves to those places. And I have a feeling that there's probably more racism in larger centers that are seeing more numbers. So I'm worried that the federal government will say, okay, well, we're getting negative feedback on immigration, so we're going to cut the numbers because we don't have enough doctors and housing and stuff like that, which are all, good points. But I'm afraid that how it's going to affect us, because we don't do a good job of keeping our immigration numbers. I mean, I know all the kids I taught and coached who came in from away, very few of them are still in the city. And I'm talking about when the Syrians came in, when the Vietnamese War was on, we all got our fair share of immigrants, but they didn't seem to stay here. And I think that's the challenge, but I think we've got to get across to the federal government that by just cutting numbers has a really bad effect on areas that the immigrants are not staying in anyway.
Yeah, I think you've raised 2 or 3 different interesting points there. First, in terms of immigration numbers, the province is working on a carve out with the other Atlantic provinces, which we hope will get success, because there's no question we need immigrants to satisfy our workforce requirements. Retention is absolutely an issue for us. Over the 5-year time frame, our retention is nowhere near what we need to strive towards. That's why, in terms of this strategy, it's got a heavier focus around the retention side of things than the previous one. The final point I'll make is on the anti-racism side of things. That came out loud and clear during consultation with newcomers and service providers. It is a pervasive problem in this community.
Really?
Absolutely. It came out across the board.
Like, is it overt or is it?
Absolutely is. The examples that were given were startling. And you and I are in the wrong demographic to speak to it. But I can tell you, having sat through a lot of the consultation that we did with roundtables with newcomers, we have a long way to go. We're a friendly community, but we're not necessarily a welcoming community.
So how do we? The challenge then is, how do we change that?
That's why it became a very big portion of this strategy to focus on the anti-racism side. It's the Our Region, Our Home is an attempt at starting that storytelling that needs to go on to show how these people are a key and important part of our community. We've a long way to go.
So you got to integrate them into social groups. Groups.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And for people that are here to recognize the value that immigrants aren't taking something away from our residents. Far from it. They're not taking jobs away from the existing people that are here. They're bringing new wealth to the community, new ideas, adding a huge amount of value in a lot of ways. That's why that storytelling piece is so important. Sorry, Catherine.
That's okay.
But I mean, look, this was loud and clear during the consultation.
Can I interrupt you?
I also
Move on to Mariah, because we also got, our next one is the Succeed and Stay.
Okay.
Perfect. I was just going to very quickly just address that point as well. Just working in DEI from another lens, knowing a lot of discrimination in St. John can sometimes be polite discrimination where you won't see it so overtly, but it is very impactful for the people having to go through it. So that storytelling piece, that education piece, like having it in the pillars for this plan, I think is very important and going to be impactful for keeping people here, which is going to be important. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, seconder? On the question? Right, okay. All right.
Introduce.
Yeah, go ahead.
The next speaker is Fabricio Lima. He's the city's growth manager, and he'll be providing an update on the City Succeed and Stay immigration strategy. Also, just for your awareness, in the package, there's a supplementary staff report that recommends endorsement of the Pathways to Belonging regional immigration strategy as presented by Envision and and the St. John Lip, and direct staff to report back to the Growth Committee with a plan to transition the City Succeed and Stay immigration strategy to the regional immigration strategy. And with that, I'll hand it over to Fabricio. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Growth Committee. Thanks for the opportunity. Today I'm going to give a bit of an update on the where the Succeed and Stay immigration status is, recognizing the great work of the city has put together. And I think this is an evolution as we look at the regional strategy. The strategy really emerged as a local response of economic and demographic needs. Just going to go here. So you can see that the Succeed and Stay strategy was really with the really trying to grow the population and over a decade of 25,000 people with a lot of alignment on those strategic plans, council priorities, and all of them in terms of supporting the vision of inclusivity, sustainability, population, and economic growth, as well as very much aligned with the corporate strategic plan, which is executes inclusive population growth strategies. So just as a bit of a refresh, these are the four strategic pillars of the Succeed and Stay strategy. So based on these four pillars, the strategy enable a consolidation of 8 strategic priorities. And out of these 8 priorities, a number of tactics were developed. So, of course, we are working with key partners, and some of them are here on this room. And as we look into the regional strategy, the partners remain the same. And the idea is that all these partners are responsible for the execution of the 26 tactics that are in place right now, and they will remain as responsible to execute all the tactics coming forward on the next strategy. So as you can see, of the 26 tactics of the 8 priorities, the City of St. John leads 4 and co-leads 2 with Envision. And you see on this slide all the partners in who is leading, and I want to stress that these tactics reflect how the work has been prioritized on current and available resources. So you can see whether they're operational, they're complete, and so forth. And I have a few examples. So these are the city tactics. These are the ones that the City of St. John has been leading. So we talk here about the immigration website. So we do have a website up and running. Collaborative welcome events, we have a number. We'll come to that in a moment. Emergency service communication strategy, which is a pilot project that we put together with the support with the police force of the City of St. John. And of course, the improved access of housing information, which is the Housing Expo that we've been working with some of our partners. We also do have dedicated resources to continue to work on this file. It's a very important file. And priority 8, it's a priority that has been recognized as where we need to regionalize the strategy. So some of the, these are just examples of some of the initiatives, like the welcome events, and I can mention quickly here the Multiculturalism Day, which is a priority to Tactic 4, Passport to Parks, with special emphasis on newcomers coming up, as well as Market Mingles. There's a number of welcoming events. I think Catherine alluded to our region, our home. So this campaign, we work very close with the local immigration partnership, as well with all other partners. So these are examples of some of here's the website that I just alluded to. So, and this is the services inventory. This was actually put together by Envision in collaboration with our partners. This is to allow the community to find what services are available for them within the community and the ecosystem according to their immigration status, ages, and needs. So it comes down to, okay, so where are we going from here? So since the Succeeding State strategy was launched in 2022, we have this status of a number of over half of the tactics have been started, some of them completed, and as we move forward, and I think alluded to the previous presentation, there are a lot of data was based on prior to COVID, so there's a need of a bit of an evolution and upgrade. And I think that Envision St. John, in collaboration with the city, is leading this next step going forward. And these are basically the strategic alignments that we see between the current strategy and the Pathways to Belong strategy. So these are the main points that we see that we need to focus in terms of alignment. And these are key decisions that I believe it's the most important thing to transition. I think we need to have a lot of conversation, roundtables to discuss who will be responsible for what tactic and what tactic from the Succeeding State will be maintained and what will transition to the regional oversight under the Pathways to Belonging. So I think that's where we are at in terms of, so it's been a great work from the city in terms of leading this in partnership with all our partners. But as we move forward, I guess that's the key point now is defining the responsibilities and what needs to stay. So with that, these are the recommendations, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Certainly. Okay. And I just have one question before we pass resolution. Do we have, for a future meeting, obviously not today, any kind of outcomes as to how Succeeding State is doing in terms, because we do hear that people are leaving to go to larger centers, which is why we develop Succeeding State. And so I'm just wondering if down the road we can get something back to see how we're doing with that.
We can definitely provide that. I can say that the City of St. John today it's over the average in terms of retaining newcomers. So in status of 2021 census, newcomers represent 6 to 7% of City of St. John's compared to provincial average of 5.8. We can definitely get to those details and provide some of that information in terms of all the campaign that we've put together, all the work that we've been done with the partners and what that drive. It is true that newcomers are always looking for opportunities and
I understand that. We've got to move along, but I just wanted to see if we can get it for a future meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep,
okay, so on the question, all those in favor?
They must have updated
Thank you.
or something.
All right. Moving on to 7.
Circulate.
Thank you, Captain.
Sounds good.
Yep. Okay, the next item is around our East Side Community Services and Programming Evaluation. So as part of city-supported programs and services with community centers and neighborhood associations, it was identified that a deeper understanding of community needs on the east side of St. John is required. As part of the 2025 Community Services Work Plan, an East Side review is underway. Program Manager Craig Gannon will be providing an update on the progress of this review, an overview of the phases completed, and next steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for allowing me the time to provide an update on projects I've been working on. So, as mentioned, I'm Craig Gannon. I'm the program manager leading the Eastside Evaluation, and I'm going to give a very short presentation on what I've been up to over the past little bit. Okay, so just to begin, just a bit of why we are conducting this study. So, essentially, we are doing an evaluation of the Ward 4 community services, and within those boundaries, we're also including Ward 3's East St. John and McAllister regions. So our goal is to identify gaps in strategic opportunities for improvement of community services in the East region. So the main portion of this presentation are progress.
Very sorry about that. First time, obviously, as noticed. So we began with a demographic and infrastructure review of Ward 4 in East McAllister. And this was essentially to understand the population that we're impacting and the facilities and the systems that serve them. And then we did a comparative analysis of the North, the South, and the West service regions, so essentially the other regions of the city, which will be helpful later in comparing the East Side and how it stacks up against the other regions of the city in terms of community services. So we also gathered an understanding of neighborhood groups in St. John, so how they came about and how they developed to what they are today. And kind of a main, we'll call it tool of this whole project is the GIS map that we've developed. And I'm going to talk more about it on the next slide, but it's essentially to visualize services, transit, and our demographics in the East communities. We also identified a preliminary list of East Side service providers and community groups, and these are essentially the main stakeholders that we are conducting interviews and surveys with to gather our data during the study. We've engaged key stakeholders, including neighborhood groups and centers, also on the other regions of the city, just to have an understanding of what's currently out there in the other regions, and also what sort of service types are being provided to the communities. And then finally, we designed and finalized 3 different types of surveys using the Jotform platform. So these are online surveys and also hard copies we made. And essentially the public-facing survey is one that we distributed through channels such as schools, also through community centers, and also any stakeholder that we have conducted an interview or survey with, we would always ask at the end for consent to have them send our public-facing survey around. And this is to gather public input on the current state of community services in the East Side as they perceive it. And then our provider and hybrid survey tools, these are essentially ways that we guided the conversation while conducting those interviews and surveying the stakeholders we've identified. So this is the interactive map of the East Side. What you're looking at right now is just a still image of a layer. This is essentially the low income rate in the different communities of the boundaries of our study. Now, the reason for making this map is essentially it's a data-driven visualization. What this is going to do, it's going to allow us to compare neighboring communities and understand perhaps which communities may require a little bit more attention in terms of community services presence. And it just kind of caters availability and perhaps proximity of services that we will perhaps recommend. Now, structure, again, it's very interactive and comparative. Just with the click of a button, you can see several demographic characteristics about a community. And then also we are going to be inputting the service providers we've identified and talked to along with the service types they provide. So it's going to act almost like a visual directory of community services on the East. And then how is this going to be used in the end? So essentially, we wanted to fabricate this to be a decision-making tool when it comes to making recommendations. What we want to do is we want to have concrete data in terms of whether it's deciding which location we are going to place or centralize our services, perhaps where we're going to allocate more resources. This essentially it provides a very clean slate and an understanding of what the differences are between the communities. Now, our next steps, we are currently concluding phase 1. So we are finalizing those service provider discussions, and we're documenting the offerings that they provide as well as gaps that we've noticed in the beginning. And then after we finish our discussions, we're going to move on to our initial data interpretation and then begin comparative analysis. So phase 3 is a 2-part phase, with 3A being the analysis of service data and comparing it with the other wards, identifying concrete trends within the information that we've gathered. So this is a deeper dive into the interpretation that we've already done. Now at phase 3B, we are going to validate these findings with our internal stakeholders, ensuring that everyone that impacts community service delivery to the communities are at the table. And we're also going to clarify those gaps that we've identified through these discussions. Phase 4, we will be launching our public-facing Shape Your City survey, and then kind of piggybacking off of events and hosting our own open houses for the public to come and voice their opinions about the information that we've gathered and also the chance for additional insights. And then finally, our phase 5 will be delivering final actionable recommendations to council based on the information that we've gathered. ensuring that we can make community services as equitable and as available as possible in the East regions. And that was it for my short presentation. I will allow the time, or sorry, it's not me allowing it, but if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, no, that was an excellent presentation, well done, and very thorough. Can I get a motion to receive and file the update for information? Barry and Mariah on the question, all those in favor? Okay, thanks very much, guys, great update.
Thank you very much, Chair.
7.2, Amy?
Thank you, Deputy. Our next and last speaker is Ben Purinton. Ben is a Senior Technical Services Engineer, and he'll be providing an update on various aspects of the Community Standards Compliance programs, including the Community Enhancement Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Poppenroth. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Growth Committee. Today I'll be providing an update on the status and performance of the city's community standards compliance programs at the midpoint of 2025. So I'll just start with a quick overview of the presentation. I'll be giving a summary of our programs and ongoing pilot projects, followed by a review of performance statistics for the Dangerous and Vacant Building Program, Minimum Property Standards Program, and the Community Standards Program. And finally, I'll provide an update on the status of ongoing pilots within these programs and their outcomes to date. So where Growth Committee is familiar with our compliance programs, I'll just provide a quick summary of them. The Dangerous and Vacant Building Program monitors vacant buildings throughout the city. We pursue enforcement action, which can result in demolition, though often work with property owners to see these buildings repaired and reoccupied. We have the Minimum Property Standards Program, which enforces maintenance and occupancy standards on rental buildings. This ensures that apartment units throughout the city are well maintained and kept safe by building owners. And finally, the Community Standards Program, which primarily addresses unsightly premises and zoning bylaw complaints, as well as serious dog control matters. Before diving into statistics, I also wanted to provide an overview of our two ongoing pilot projects as a reminder of their purpose and intended outcomes. In 2024, we launched the Community Enhancement Pilot, which added 2 staff members for a 15-month term, a temporary manager to the Dangerous and Vacant Building Program, and a temporary building inspector to the Minimum Property Standards Program. These positions were filled by January 2024, but both have remained vacant for an extended period, which I'll discuss more later. The intent was to resolve more cases in both programs, focusing on unsightly repair of vacant buildings and proactive enforcement of minimum property standards. In addition, we also expanded the Community Standards Program by adding a standards officer for a 24-month term in February of 2024. The goal of that pilot was also to increase the number of resolved cases and to streamline procedures, particularly around zoning enforcement. So now that we've recapped the programs and pilots, I'll move on to statistics for each area. Each slide provides annual results from 2023 before the pilots were launched, and then followed by 2024 and year-to-date 2025 numbers. So starting with the Dangerous and Vacant Building Program, in 2023, prior to the pilot, we had resolved 47 cases and had typically averaged around 50 resolved cases annually prior to that. And following launch of the pilot with the additional manager position, results improved in line with expectations. We saw 60 resolved cases in 2024, meeting our target. And so far in 2025, we've resolved 40 cases, well on track for another strong year. The additional position did have an impact for a time, but these results were largely achieved without it, as the position was only filled for 6 months, which I'll discuss more later. We've also seen fluctuations in the number of new cases each year. Despite this, there's been a net reduction of about 20 vacant buildings from our monitoring list. Previously hovered around 150 vacant buildings, now at around 130. In addition, the quality of those buildings have improved. I'd also like to add that case resolutions have primarily been achieved through voluntary compliance, as we've only issued 12 notices to comply over the past 3 years. So next, moving on to the Minimum Property Standards Program. In 2023, before the pilot, we had 35 resolved cases, and after launch and the addition of a building inspector, in 2024, we resolved 39 cases. In 2025, we've seen stronger momentum as we're on pace to resolve 50 cases for the first time since 2017. However, overall performance has fallen short of the pilot targets. Similar to the dangerous and vacant building program, the additional position that we had was only filled for 6 months in 2024, which made it hard to demonstrate an impact, as it can often take 1 to 2 years to resolve minimum property standards cases. New cases continue to outpace resolved cases, particularly in early 2024, when we began to transition from a complaint-based approach to a proactive one while we had additional staff. And in the final column, the number of units marked safe reflects the number of units affected by each resolved case. And finally, we have the Community Standards Program, which has had great success since expanding. In 2024, the program more than doubled its previous year's results, resolving 317 cases and exceeding its targets. This trend continued in 2025, with 141 cases resolved so far, again on track to surpass expectations. Another important trend to note is the increasing volume of complaints and new cases, evident in 2024. New cases tend to come during the summer months, so 2025 is likely to be high as well. And the rising demand highlights the need to maintain enhanced staffing in the program. The strong performance we see in large part is due to having consistent high-performing staff in place, something critical to the program's success. It's also notable that most of the cases resolved have been resolved through voluntary compliance, as only a minimal number of notices to comply have been issued, reinforcing the value of early engagement and resolution. So overall, we're seeing strong momentum in every area, with this year shaping up to surpass 2024 in key metrics. The dangerous and vacant building program continues to steadily improve, with more resolved cases, which has been achieved with less staff than anticipated. The minimum property standards program continues to improve as well, although pilot targets were not met due to staffing challenges. And the community standards program exceeded its targets in 2024 and is on pace to do so again in 2025. So results have been very encouraging, especially given the capacity constraints in some areas. So now on to the status of the pilot projects. So as mentioned, the community enhancement pilot was launched to support the dangerous and vacant building and minimum property standards programs through 2 15-month term positions. These were filled in January 2024, but ultimately became vacant in July as those staff members transitioned into other roles within growth and community services. When the positions were reposted, there was less time remaining on the contracts, which made recruitment difficult. And we faced a limited applicant pool, and despite extending the contract length slightly in 2025, we've still been unable to fill them. As a result, there's been limited opportunity to test this initiative. In the case of the dangerous and vacant building program, the strong results achieved without the additional staff could raise the question as to whether the extra position would have significantly increased the number of resolved cases. Ultimately, this program operates with a limited pool of about 130 properties, and many of these are influenced by broader economic trends. For the minimum property standards program, we don't have conclusive evidence that a sustained staffing increase would have substantially increased resolved cases, but anecdotally, we found that having an extra inspector in the past has caused that, and we feel that had staffing levels been maintained, we would have seen more notable results. However, it remains uncertain at this time as to whether the target set at the start of the pilot would have been met. In contrast, the community standards expansion has been highly successful. In February 2024, we added a second standards officer for a 24-month term, doubling the program's capacity. Since then, the program has consistently exceeded performance targets, resolving more cases, reducing timelines to do so, and maintaining strong voluntary compliance. This additional capacity has allowed the team to respond more quickly, manage seasonal surges in complaints, and streamline enforcement procedures. And the pilot has clearly demonstrated the ability to contribute sustained results and improve service delivery. So to summarize the pilot outcomes thus far, the community enhancement pilot faced staffing challenges as both term positions became vacant early and have remained unfilled. As a result, the full impact has not been tested. Despite this, the dangerous and vacant building program exceeded targets, suggesting that additional staff may have had a minimal impact on the number of resolved cases. The minimum property standards program saw limited gains. A sustained third inspector might have improved results, but we currently can't confirm whether the pilot targets would have been achieved. And finally, the community standards expansion was highly effective, more than doubling output, exceeding targets, and maintaining high voluntary compliance. With that concludes my update. I'm happy to answer any questions on the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Excellent report. Okay, can I get a second there? Okay, on the question, Barry?
Yeah, Ben, I noticed you showed that house that I'm really pleased that you get torn down when they had Lay Street. They're hauling the stuff away today. But that's the guy that came in and argued that the house was in good shape, that it burned 3 times. But when that house went up for sale, there was about 13 other buildings with Tim Somerville's name on them. After that guy left council that night, about 13 buildings went up. Are all those 13 buildings suspect too? Because this guy that was involved here, I think was involved with all 13, and then Tim Somerville's name goes up the next day. And they're all buildings that are really look like they're in bad shape.
Through the chair, we have a number of enforcement cases active on those properties and are
But
pursuing audits
because we were getting phone calls about people trying to save that one building who said that they had other buildings they were trying to save. So are we dealing with, one major, we have a number of them, but are we dealing with one landlord who has all these buildings that we probably should be putting some pressure on?
through the chair, not all of our cases are a result of that particular individual, but we do have a number of cases that they are in care and control of that we're actively working to address. So.
Yeah. Okay, and the other thing is I noticed that we needed some more staff, that we were short-staffed. I'd like to see us fill those roles as fast as possible.
Through the chair, both positions are currently posted, working to get those filled.
Thank you.
Excellent report. We've got the motion on the floor. All in favor? Opposed, abstaining? Thank you very much, Ben. Excellent.
Thanks, Ben.
Seconder?
Thank you.
Barry, on the question to adjourn, all in favor? Good. Thank you, everybody.